I wasn't supposed to be on that bus. It was the kind of ride you only book when your life's unraveling just fast enough to make flying too complicated and too expensive. I had $143 in my checking account, a cracked iPhone screen, and a backpack with half of my clothes stuffed into it in a panic. I was leaving something behind. I just hadn't figured out what I was heading toward. It was a Wednesday. Late August. Hot as hell even after sunset. I boarded the bus in Kansas City and looked for a seat toward the back, away from the crying baby I could already hear near the front. That's when I saw him. He was sitting alone, head down, hoodie up despite the heat, earbuds in, long legs stretched out in front of him like he was trying to disappear. Something about him made me pause. Not because he was hot, though he was. It was more the vibe, like he was trying to convince himself he didn't exist. I motioned toward the seat next to him. Mind if I? He looked up, just a flick of his eyes under the hood, and shrugged. Sure. His voice was low, barely there. I slid into the seat and dropped my bag between my feet. I didn't ask his name. He didn't ask mine. The engine rumbled beneath us, and the lights dimmed as the bus pulled out of the station and onto the highway. We didn't speak for the first hour, not even a polite nod, but it wasn't awkward. It was weirdly peaceful, like we were both carrying too much weight to make small talk feel worth it. Eventually, he shifted beside me, one leg brushing against mine, and said, "You leaving or going home?" "Leaving," I replied. He didn't ask why, just nodded like he understood, like he'd been doing the same thing. "What about you?" I asked. He paused, trying to disappear for a bit. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt too on the nose. Two strangers, neither of us running toward something, just away. I leaned my head back against the seat. This bus smelled like everyone's regrets, or is that just me? He smiled for the first time. Barely, but it was there. We rode mostly in silence after that. He dozed off for a bit, his shoulder slowly tipping toward mine, until it rested against me, and I let it. I didn't move. I just sat there in the dark, the road humming beneath us, his weight grounding me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. It was close to 2 a.m. when the bus stopped at a grimy roadside station outside Des Moines. 15-minute break. Everyone stretched and stumbled off, desperate for caffeine or a cigarette. I followed him out without thinking. We stood near the vending machines, sipping burnt coffee from paper cups. He didn't say anything for a while, then suddenly turned to me. "You want to get a motel room when we get to Omaha?" I blinked. "What?" He met my eyes. Steady. Calm. "Not like that. Just, I'm tired. You look tired. Figured we could crash for the night. I don't snore." I should have said no. My brain tried to remind me of every rule about strangers, about safety, about logic, but I just said, "Yeah, okay." No questions, no backstories, no expectations. We got back on the bus and sat closer this time, his thigh pressed against mine the whole way. I didn't know his name. He didn't know mine, but that night was going to become something neither of us could forget. We rolled into Omaha around 4:35 a.m., the kind of hour that feels more like a glitch in time than part of the day. The sky was still dark, the bus station buzzing with fluorescent lights, and that weird mix of exhaustion and indifference from the staff behind the counters. I followed him off the bus. We didn't talk, just walked side by side through the mostly empty terminal until we pushed through the glass doors and into the sticky pre-dawn air. It smelled like asphalt and something fried nearby, maybe a 24-hour diner we didn't even consider walking into. He looked down the street toward a faded neon sign flickering in the distance. Bluebird Inn, vacancy. Not exactly a 5-star resort, but the promise of a bed and a door that locked? That sounded like luxury. He glanced at me. "You good with that?" "Yeah," I said. "Better than the bus." We didn't speak again until we reached the front desk. The clerk barely looked up as we walked in, just mumbled, "ID, card," and slid a clipboard across the counter. Daniel. Yeah, I finally caught his name then, when he handed over his ID, pulled out a debit card, and paid without hesitation. One bed okay? The clerk asked, bored. He looked at me for a second. I gave a shrug that I hoped said, whatever, man. He nodded. We got room 107. Ground floor. Faint smell of mildew and an AC unit that rattled when it ran. But the sheets looked clean, and the mattress didn't sag in the middle, so we didn't complain. Once the door clicked shut behind us, Daniel tossed his bag onto the chair and flopped down on the edge of the bed, exhaling like he hadn't breathed properly in hours. I dropped mine in the corner and peeled off my hoodie, my shirt sticking slightly to my back from the humid air. I caught him watching me for a second before he looked away. He kicked off his shoes. You want the shower first? Nah, go for it. He stood, grabbed a fresh shirt from his bag, and disappeared into the bathroom. I heard the water turn on, the low hum of the fan. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the silence settle over the room. We still hadn't exchanged more than a dozen words, but it didn't feel weird. Just quiet. Still, I looked around, peeling wallpaper, a lamp with a crooked shade, the kind of place you only stay in when you don't want to be found. 15 minutes later, he came out, towel around his neck, hair damp, skin flushed from the hot water. He wasn't wearing a shirt, just some dark athletic shorts that hung low on his hips. Your turn, he said, like we were roommates or old friends. Like this was normal. I nodded, grabbed my stuff, and headed into the steam-filled bathroom. When I came out, he was already under the covers, on the side closest to the wall. He left the other side open. Light from the parking lot filtered in through the slats of the blinds, casting long shadows across the bed. I stood there for a second, unsure of what the rules were here. You can sleep, he said quietly. I'm not going to do anything. I let out a short laugh. Wasn't worried about that. Well, some people would be. I climbed in beside him, careful not to brush against him, even though the bed wasn't exactly wide. We laid there for a while in silence, both facing up, hands folded on our stomachs like we were posing for a painting. Then he said, You ever feel like everything in your life exploded all at once, and now you're just walking around pretending like it didn't? His voice was low, steady, but there was something raw in it. I stared at the ceiling. Yeah, this week. He let out a breath. Same. We didn't ask for details. We didn't need to. Just knowing we weren't alone in the mess felt like enough. Eventually, he turned onto his side, back facing me. Night, Mark, he said. I blinked. You knew my name? You wrote it on the luggage tag on your backpack. That made me smile, for the first time in what felt like days. Night, Daniel. And that was it. Two strangers in a motel bed. No questions asked. Just the quiet, strange comfort of not being alone. I'm not sure what time it was when I woke up, but the room was still dark, the only light coming from the soft blue glow of the motel alarm clock. 3:47 a.m. I lay still, listening to the faint buzz of the AC and the muffled traffic outside. Daniel was still next to me, on his side, facing away. His breathing was even, calm. He was asleep, or at least he was trying to be. My body was warm, not from the thin motel blanket, but from the heat between us. At some point during the night, we'd shifted. Our shoulders were touching, faint but unmistakable. I should have pulled back, given space. I didn't. I didn't know what I was doing. Or maybe I did. Maybe I just didn't care anymore. I'd spent so long playing it safe, overthinking every word, every move, every feeling. But here, in this nowhere motel, with a guy I'd known less than a day, the usual rules didn't seem to apply. Then he spoke. You awake? His voice was just above a whisper, like he wasn't sure if I'd answer. Yeah, I said, barely louder. He shifted, slowly turning onto his back. Now we were facing the same direction, side by side, staring at the cracked ceiling tiles like they held answers to questions neither of us wanted to ask. I can't sleep, he said after a while. Same. He hesitated, then added, You ever feel like you could tell a total stranger something and it wouldn't even feel weird? Yeah, I said. Feels safer, in a way. He nodded, the movement barely there. I haven't really talked to anyone since I left. Not really. You running from something? He turned his head slightly. You said no questions, I smiled. Right. Silence settled again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just full. Heavy in a good way. After a minute, Daniel spoke again. I broke up with someone. Kind of. If you can even call it that. His words were slow, like he was still figuring them out as they left his mouth. I wasn't supposed to care. Wasn't supposed to feel like this. I didn't press. I just let him speak. He was older. Married. I didn't know at first. And when I found out, I didn't leave. Not right away. That's on me. He let out a bitter laugh. I told myself I was strong enough to handle it, that it didn't matter, that I wasn't catching feelings. But I did. And he didn't leave his wife. He wasn't going to. Daniel exhaled, long and slow. So I left. No job, no apartment, just gone. I stayed quiet for a second, then said, "That doesn't make you weak." He glanced at me, eyes unreadable in the dim light. You? I shrugged. Not as dramatic, just lost. Job's a dead end. My boyfriend left 6 months ago, and I haven't dated since. My lease is up next week, and I didn't renew it. So I got on a bus. He smirked. So we're both professional escape artists. Basically. A beat passed. Then he asked, "You ever think about just starting over somewhere no one knows you?" All the time. We laid there, side by side in silence again, the space between us small, then smaller. My hand was resting on the mattress between us, palm up. I didn't think. I just left it there, and after a second, I felt his fingers brush against mine. Hesitant, gentle, testing. I didn't pull away. His hand slid over mine slowly until our fingers were laced together. His grip wasn't tight, more like a grounding tether in the dark. Neither of us said a word. I don't know if we ever actually slept. Maybe we drifted. Maybe we just lay there, not speaking, hands still laced together between us on that scratchy motel comforter, letting silence say more than either of us knew how to. When light finally started slipping through the edge of the curtains, I blinked against it. Daniel was already awake, or maybe he never fell asleep either. He hadn't let go of my hand. He looked over at me, and for a moment, neither of us said a word. Then he murmured, "I didn't think I'd feel okay this morning." "Do you?" He nodded slowly. "Weirdly, yeah." I sat up, stretching, the motel's old AC unit buzzing in the corner. "We've got an hour before checkout." Daniel sat up too, rubbing the back of his neck. His hair was a mess, flattened on one side, and he looked lighter somehow. Still tired, still worn, but a little less like someone running for his life. "You want coffee?" I asked. He smirked. "Is that a question?" There was a gas station next to the motel, and we walked over barefoot in motel slippers, hoodies thrown on over wrinkled shirts. We must have looked ridiculous, but I didn't care. I hadn't cared about a lot of things in the last 24 hours, and it felt weirdly good. We got 2 large coffees, sat on the curb outside, and sipped in silence for a bit before Daniel finally spoke. "So what now?" I looked at him, squinting into the morning sun. "For you or for us?" He took a sip, then said, "Both, I guess." I didn't know how to answer either question. We hadn't exchanged numbers. We hadn't made any promises. Hell, we hadn't even kissed. But that didn't mean it wasn't something. "I'm heading west," I said finally. "Not sure where I'll land." He nodded. I was thinking maybe Denver. We sat in it for a moment. The impossible question: was this supposed to be one of those strange, fleeting moments that stick with you forever but never happen again? Or was it something that deserved a shot outside this motel, off this bus route? Daniel tapped his cup against mine. "I don't usually do this kind of thing," Me either. But maybe that's a sign we should. I blinked at him. Do what, exactly? He glanced down at our shoes, then back up at me. Keep going. Together. At least for a little while. My heart stuttered a bit in my chest. I didn't say yes right away. I didn't say no either. We walked back to the room to pack our things, and as I zipped up my backpack, I looked at him. Denver's not a bad idea. He smiled. Really smiled. Wide and honest for the first time since I met him. I'll take the window seat this time, he said. I chuckled. Deal. We didn't plan further than that. Didn't talk about what it meant or where it was heading. But when we stepped out of room 107 and handed back the key, we didn't do it alone. The Greyhound terminal in Omaha didn't look any better in daylight. If anything, the harsh sunlight only made the cracked linoleum floors and humming fluorescent lights seem more depressing. But somehow, standing next to Daniel with my backpack slung over one shoulder, it felt different. Less like a dead end. More like a beginning. We didn't say much in line. I bought 2 tickets west. Omaha to Denver. One way. I tried not to think too hard about what that meant. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe it wasn't. But whatever it was, it felt like the right thing to do. We found seats again near the back, this time with the window seat left open for Daniel like he'd asked. He slid in, I followed, and we settled into the slow rhythm of the highway. Outside, the world turned into rolling fields and the occasional rundown gas station. Inside, we passed a bottle of water back and forth, shared a pack of peanut M&Ms, and made fun of the guy 2 rows up who was watching TikToks without headphones. At one point, I dozed off. When I opened my eyes, my head was leaning lightly against Daniel's shoulder. He didn't move. I straightened up a little, but not much. Just enough to glance at him. He was looking out the window, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're a cuddler," he said without looking at me. "Sorry." "Don't be." He turned his head toward me then, eyes soft. "It's nice." I nodded, then looked back down at my lap. "You know," he said a moment later, "if you had told me 2 days ago that I'd be sharing a motel bed with a stranger and then voluntarily getting back on a bus with him, you'd have called bullshit," he laughed. "Yeah, hard." We got quiet again. But it wasn't the awkward kind. It was like we'd moved past the need to fill every second with words. After a few hours, we hit a rest stop, another gas station with 2 bright lights and overpriced snacks. Daniel bought 2 sandwiches. I grabbed a couple drinks. We sat outside at one of those weather-warped plastic picnic tables while the driver smoked nearby. It was there, with a ham sandwich halfway to his mouth, that Daniel asked, "You think we're doing something stupid?" I shrugged. "Probably," he grinned. "Good." We finished eating, and before we got back on the bus, he pulled his hoodie tighter and bumped my shoulder lightly with his. "Thanks for not asking too many questions." I looked at him. "Thanks for not pretending to have all the answers." When we boarded again, we didn't say anything else. But when the sun started setting behind us and the bus rolled into the soft pink haze of evening, Daniel leaned his head on my shoulder without a word. I let it stay there the rest of the way to Denver. We arrived in Denver just after 10 p.m. The city was a flicker of lights against the mountains, unfamiliar and wide open in a way that made my chest tighten, equal parts fear and possibility. The bus hissed to a stop, and people started filing off in tired, clumsy lines. Daniel and I stood up slowly, neither of us in a rush, both moving like we weren't quite sure what we were walking into. Outside, the air was cooler, cleaner. The elevation made everything feel just a little sharper, like the world had turned up its contrast settings. We didn't have a plan. That hit me harder than I expected. "So," I said, adjusting my backpack, "you know anyone here?" Daniel shook his head. "Nope. You?" "Nope," he laughed. "2 geniuses, clearly." Across the street, we spotted a cheap chain motel glowing under a buzzing blue sign. Not much better than the last one, but better than nothing. I looked at him. "We doing this again? Unless you want to sleep on a bench downtown." I didn't. So we walked. The lobby was empty. The clerk barely looked up. We got a room, one bed again, not even discussed this time, and trudged up the stairs. The room was fine. Brown carpet, yellow light. A weird painting of a horse above the bed. I collapsed backward onto the mattress and exhaled hard. My spine is made of bus seats. Daniel kicked off his shoes and dropped beside me, groaning. My legs have been asleep since Nebraska. We lay there, side by side, staring up at the horse like it held answers. After a while, he turned his head toward me. We gonna keep pretending this is normal? I looked over. It's not? He raised an eyebrow. Mark. And there it was. My name, said like it meant something now. I swallowed. No, it's not normal, but I don't hate it. He nodded, serious now. Me either. There was a pause, a heavy silence thick with whatever had been building since that first shoulder bump on the bus. I keep thinking about it, he said quietly. About what? Touching your hand, that night, in the motel. I felt my heart skip. Yeah, he nodded. I didn't mean to, at first, but then I didn't want to stop. We were lying so close now, our arms brushing. I didn't want you to stop either, I said, barely above a whisper. He shifted, propping himself up on one elbow, looking down at me. I haven't done this before, he admitted. Not really. I didn't ask what this meant. I just looked at him. Okay, he studied my face. You're not going to ask questions? Nope. His gaze softened. Good. And then, slowly, so slowly, it barely felt real, he leaned in and kissed me. Just once. Soft. Careful. Testing. When he pulled back, his eyes searched mine for panic, regret, anything. All I said was, do that again. And he did. That second kiss wasn't careful. It was still gentle. Daniel didn't move like someone used to this, but it had more weight. Like once the door cracked open, something rushed through it, and neither of us wanted to close it. His hand found my jaw, fingers brushing over stubble as he deepened the kiss. It wasn't rushed. Wasn't aggressive. It just was. Like our bodies were finally catching up to what had already happened between us, in silence, glances, shared motel beds, and long bus rides. When we broke apart, we didn't say anything. We didn't need to. We moved together without speaking, pulling off shirts, tossing hoodies onto the motel chair. The room was dim, the only light a flicker from the parking lot, through the cracked curtain. It cast soft shadows across his skin, and I caught myself just staring at him for a second. He was still figuring this out. You could see it in his eyes, the caution, the surprise, maybe even a little fear. But he wasn't pulling away. He wanted this, and that made it feel different, real. We didn't rush. Every movement felt like something we were both learning in real time, like we were figuring each other out, not just physically, but emotionally. I could feel it in the way his fingers hesitated at first, and then gained confidence, in the way he looked at me, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he blinked too long. At one point, he whispered, I don't know what I'm doing. You're doing fine, I said, smiling. Better than fine. He kissed me again, slower this time, his hand on my chest, my palm at the back of his neck, grounding him. We didn't talk about labels, we didn't talk about what came next, we just stayed close, tangled up, breathing against each other. When we finally settled under the blanket, our legs intertwined, Daniel sighed and pressed his forehead to my shoulder. I wasn't supposed to be here, he said quietly. I know, I replied. But I'm glad I am. I nodded, eyes closed. Me too. And that was the first time in months, maybe longer, that I fell asleep feeling safe. The next morning, we didn't rush to get up. The motel checkout was at 11, but we stayed in bed long past waking, talking quietly under the sheets like kids hiding from the world. The sun filtered through the blinds in dusty rays. Daniel's hair stuck up on one side, and mine probably looked worse, but he didn't stop looking at me. I keep expecting this to feel awkward, he said, voice still raspy with sleep. Does it? He shook his head. No, just quiet, like it makes sense. We took our time getting dressed, brushing our teeth side by side in the motel bathroom, still not quite believing any of this had happened. And yet, there we were, shoulder to shoulder, comfortable, like we'd done this a dozen times. At checkout, the clerk barely looked up as we handed over the key. Outside, the air was warm. The city stretched out in front of us, loud, alive, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of it. What now? I asked as we stood on the sidewalk, bags slung over our shoulders. Daniel gave me a half smile. You hungry? I raised an eyebrow. That's your big plan? Waffles, he said seriously. We've earned waffles. We found a small diner a few blocks away, the kind with cracked red booths and coffee that tastes like it's been brewing since the Reagan administration. But it was perfect. We got a booth in the corner, ordered a pile of food we had no business finishing, and sat there like two people who hadn't met just days before on a bus headed nowhere. Between bites of waffle and syrup-sticky fingers, he said, I don't know what this is, what we're doing. I looked at him, steady. Me either. But I don't want to stop. I smiled. Then don't. He stared at me for a second, like he was memorizing something. Then he reached across the table, fingers brushing mine. Let's figure it out. So that's what we did. We found a cheap Airbnb for the week, walked neighborhoods, sent out resumes, cooked frozen pizzas, shared blankets on a lumpy couch, talked until 2 a.m. about everything and nothing, took a chance on something we didn't fully understand yet, no big declarations, no promises we couldn't keep, just a quiet agreement to keep going, 2 strangers on a bus, a motel with 1 bed, no questions asked, and something that started when neither of us was looking. But maybe we both needed to be found.